Hey everyone, today we're going to take a quick little tour of our alcoholic section here in the Slater Museum's collection. So you're probably wondering, what is an alcoholic? And I actually have an example of one of our specimens right here. So an alcoholic is going to be a specimen preserved in a jar of chemicals, okay? For the most part, what types of specimens we like to put in these jars are going to be our herps. So herps are our reptiles and amphibians because herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. We'll also put soft body marine invertebrates like octopus or sea stars in here. On occasion, we'll put things like mammals in here, but usually we like to keep mammals preserved in more of a taxidermy skin kind of specimen, but on occasion we will use a jar of chemicals. And actually the Slater Museum kind of started with our alcoholics collection because Professor James Slater, who was hired as a biology professor here in the 1920s, his main focus of study was herpetology. And the museum was kind of built around his first initial research collection of like frogs and reptiles that he had in jars. So the way these are prepared is first the specimen, once it is dead, will be washed in formalin or formaldehyde depending on when the specimen was made. And then from there, once it's covered in the formalin and formaldehyde, it is then put into a jar of ethanol, and that ethanol is sealed up. It does slowly evaporate over time, so we do have to keep refilling the ethanol, but it's kind of a slow process. And actually, these specimens in these jars of chemicals can last a very long time. The oldest example I've seen is we have an octopus from the 1940s, so over 80 years, and we could potentially even have some that are older than that. Because like I said, we've had our collection of alcoholics since the 1920s, so there might be some things from the beginning of our collection. So the benefits that we get from putting them in a jar compared to, say, making a skin out of them is, unlike the skins, so like a taxidermy bird, you actually get to keep all the soft tissue when you put it in the jar. So that means the internal organs are still there, what kind of diet they had, and all the insides and skin are still there. But unfortunately, kind of some downsides are the chemicals kind of ruin the DNA, so you can't do any DNA testing. But say a scientist wanted to see what a frog's diet was from 40 years ago. They could come to our collection, ask to use one of our frog specimens, dissect it, and check the stomach of a 40-year-old frog, which is awesome. So with that, we're going to actually go take a look at our alcoholic section, and I'm going to kind of point out some really cool specimens we have in our collection. Alright, I'm making my way over to our alcoholics section of the collection. First, I wanted to show you what our alcoholics are stored in. They're in these big locker-like cabinets. On each cabinet is a paper with a list of the biological families that are stored in that locker. So each one of these bolded terms is a family. The littler term under it is a genus, and then under genus is species. So this is kind of a broad term. This first cabinet is the majority of our amphibian collection. Amphibians are frogs, salamanders, and caecilians. Caecilians are kind of like little worm-looking animals, but we don't have any. They're native to the southern hemisphere. What makes an amphibian is they are born in like a larval state, so imagine a tadpole, and then they have to metamorphosis from that larval state into their adult form, so tadpole to frog. Salamanders are very similar. And I'll go through and just point out some cool examples in our amphibian collection. So the first one I want to point out is the Mudpuppy. Mudpuppies are very similar to axolotls, where these are a full-grown salamander. They're an adult, but if you see that kind of ruffle-looking thing right there, that's their gills. So unlike most salamanders or frogs, they don't ever develop lungs, and they keep the larval trait of having gills and can never leave the water. Okay. So for contrast, here is a Pacific giant salamander. No gills. Inside, he will have lungs. so he'll be able to spend time on land and go back to the water to lay eggs and stuff like that. Okay. So just a whole bunch of different species of salamander here, all sorts of little ones, stuff like that. You might notice that all of these animals look kind of brown and dull. That's because the chemicals kind of leach out that natural pigmentation they would have and kind of cause that. So none of these really have their natural colors. So yeah, that's why everything's gray, brown, dull. Here's a great example of, well actually we can, so this is a tadpole. Okay, so that's what that larval state looks like. Okay. Then here are some mid-metamorphosis bullfrogs. So you can see they have the legs, they have arms coming in, but they still have that tail, and these guys still have to live in the water. Then later they would turn into a full-grown bullfrog, very big. Bullfrogs are actually invasive to lots of places in the world, and they outcompete native frogs. They're also immune to a disease that is killing off lots of amphibians, but they help spread that disease. So one local example would be the yellow-legged frog, which bullfrogs will eat, they outcompete, and they spread that disease too. Okay. Just lots of different little species of frog here. All right, so let's move on to our next cabinet. So this next cabinet has the last bit of our amphibian collection, and then it starts transitioning into our reptile collection. So the difference between amphibians and reptiles is reptiles are going to have a drier, scaly skin that allows them to go on land. They have a shell around their eggs so they can lay their eggs on land. Most of them will bury their eggs. Right, so let's see. Right here, this is an interesting animal. This is called a cane toad. So they are very invasive in Australia. They were brought there to help get rid of cane worms, which were an invasive pest. And then they just started breeding like crazy. They also have a toxin in them that people can actually use as a hallucinogenic. Here's another good example of that kind of color leaching. These frogs, like here's a picture. These frogs are normally very like light green. Here, they're a very like pale dull green. Now we're gonna get into our very small turtle collection. We have some baby snapping turtles here. Very cute. We have some some soft-shelled turtles. Sometimes we'll put bigger animals in here. So for example, this is a Florida cooter, but they're so big that we're only keeping the head because adult turtles do get very, very big. Now we have some different lizards down here. Very cool one is the horned toad, horned lizard, thorny devil, depending on where you live. It's what they call. They have these spikes on them to make other animals not want to eat them, because if you see something sharp and spiny, you're probably not going to. They can kind of puff up to look bigger, and some of them will shoot blood from their eyes as like a defense mechanism, and that blood is mixed with like a toxic kind of gross tasting material to scare off their predators. Okay. Now we're moving down. This is not a snake. This is a legless lizard. Okay. So some ways you could tell the difference between a snake and a legless lizard would be the head shape and the ears. Snakes don't have ears, but lizards do. A few more cool examples. We have a desert iguana right here. Behind him is a chuckwalla. Chuckwallas are awesome. They also live in a desert. They inflate to like kind of hide in cracks and not get pulled out. This is a baby one. They get much bigger than that. Yeah, so a few more lizards here. Okay, and then we get into our like first little section of snakes. Okay. We have, let's see, king snake. Very pretty patterns. Like I said, the colors are kind of washed out, but they are very colorful. Okay, so let's move on to our next cabinet, which will mostly be snakes. So our third cabinet, like I said, this one is mostly our snakes. These are going to be our non-venomous snakes. Jars and jars and jars. Up here is our very limited mammal alcoholic section. These are all bats. Like I said, for the most part, we like to make taxidermy skins out of our mammals. We do have a few more non-bat mammals in the basement, but they're not on display. And this is a good example. Like I told you, the ethanol will evaporate over time, so we do have to continue to refill these jars. So here's a big snake. This is a water snake, so it can spend some of its time in the water. We have several different species. We have gopher snakes. Sometimes we'll put multiple snakes in one, so if we look, you can see here's one snake. Twist, 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 there's another snake. So it really just depends on when and where they were collected. If they're around the same time, we'll put them in one jar, or if they're kind of very separate and don't have similar data, then they get their own jar. Okay. Now we're getting into our garter snakes. So garter snakes, very pretty color. Garter snakes are a very common snake you guys might be able to find. They have an interesting interaction with some newts that we have in the collection, where the newts are poisonous, and so most animals will avoid them. But garter snakes actually have developed an immunity to that poison, and so it's a kind of an evolutionary arms race where the garter snakes handle more poison, and then the newts start producing stronger poisons, and then the garter snakes get immune to that. So it's kind of this loop that feeds into each other. Then we have one last cabinet in our alcoholic section that we're going to go over, and I'll show you that now. So this is our last cabinet in our alcoholic section, and this one's actually my favorite. The top there is all rattlesnakes, so all of our venomous snakes. But then under these two shelves of rattlesnakes comes exotic animals. So instead of being labeled by family, like all these are, so see, this is labeled by species, these are all labeled by what country they come from. So we have Algeria, Kenya, Egypt, and we'll go through some cool examples there. I did just want to point out this. That is a sunflower star, so we do put other things, like I said, marine invertebrates in the jars. It's just the most of our collection is going to be reptiles and amphibians. Here's a whole bunch of rattlesnakes. You can see them right there. We can see his mouth is open. There's a rattle right there. So let's take a look at some of these exotics. So this is really cool, and this is a cobra. Right now, the way it's preserved, its flap isn't out, so you can't really see that broad flap, but it's very cool. This is one of the very few examples of a taxidermy reptile we have. Like I said, they don't turn out great, so that's why we mostly do the alcoholics for our reptiles and amphibians, but we do have a couple in the collection. We have another cobra here. Make our way down. These are all of our European reptiles. Let's see. We have some frogs. Right. Oh, some cool lizards. Oh, what are you? Well, you are. Salamanders. Nice. So let's move down. There's some very colorful, used to be colorful snakes. I believe these might be vine snakes. So they used to be like a bright green color, but like I said, that washed out, so now they're kind of this dull blue. They're an interesting lizard, so a big lizard here. So I don't really know a lot about a bunch of these exotic species, but they do definitely look cool. There's some more lizards. This one I do know about. This is one of my favorites in the collection. This is the Japanese giant salamander. It's one of the biggest species of salamander. It's the biggest species of salamander in the world, or the second biggest. And it's very highly endangered, only found in Japan. And then it has a very close relative, the Chinese giant salamander, which that one might be the biggest. But they live, but the Chinese giant salamander got introduced to Japan and started interbreeding with them to make hybrids. And that's one reason why they are so endangered. Okay. Then we have a last section down here. These are captive bred or country unknown, so we don't know quite where they're from. So we do get donations from zoos or breeders and stuff like that. Okay. So we have some cool lizards in here. This is interesting. It says, so J.R. Slater from the Berlin Zoo in 1964. So yeah, we have some very old specimens in here. I don't know what lizards these are, but they're donated from the Berlin Zoo in 1964. Here's a kind of taxidermied skin of an iguana. Under here, it's just kind of a random concoction of random jars we didn't quite know where to put. And then a lot of extra alcohol that we can use to go through and fill these. Oh, look at you. So I hope you enjoyed our tour of our alcoholic section of the museum, and I hope you join us for our other virtual tours that we'll have coming soon. We're going to check out our other sections. We have a very cool insect collection, mammal collection, bird collection. We'll take a look at our plant collection, so all sorts of different cool stuff coming soon. Great. Thanks. Bye.